Emily's tiny hands pressed desperately on the chest of the motionless K9, tears streaming down her cheeks as she cried out, "Please, breathe again." She thought her best friend was gone forever. Then Jack, the veteran, rushed forward, his voice breaking through the chaos. "Emily, stop! Rex is still alive!" In that moment, the world held its breath, and a story of courage, love, and sacrifice truly began. This is more than just survival. It is about the bond that can save lives in the darkest of nights. As you watch this story unfold, I invite you to share where in the world you are watching from and how this moment makes you feel. May this story bring you warmth today, and may you carry kindness with you. Have a wonderful day. The night had fallen heavily over the quiet neighborhood, a sky painted in deep charcoal with only a few pale stars managing to break through the clouded darkness. The houses lay silent, the street lamps flickering in half-hearted attempts to chase away the shadows, while a cold wind whispered through empty yards. Inside one modest wooden house, the Carter family was winding down a long day, unaware that within hours their lives would be pushed to the edge of survival. Jack Carter, a 42-year-old veteran with broad shoulders and the presence of a man who had faced the worst of battlefields, lived here with his 5-year-old daughter Emily and his loyal K9 companion Rex. They were a small family shaped by scars of the past, clinging to one another in the fragile peace they had built since Jack's return from war. Jack had carried more than physical scars from his service. His sharp brown eyes, streaked with weariness, reflected memories of loss and betrayal by the very society he had served. Yet his home had been filled with laughter because of Emily, a small girl with golden hair always falling into tangles, her pale face glowing with innocence. She was the light Jack never thought he would have again. And by her side, almost like a guardian angel cloaked in fur, was Rex, a 6-year-old German Shepherd K9 who had once fought beside Jack and carried wounds of his own. Rex's once proud stride was marked by a limp from an old injury, and his head was wrapped in a white bandage from a recent encounter with men who wanted Jack silenced. His amber eyes still burned with loyalty, but his vision was limited, and each step was a reminder that his body had already given more than enough to protect those he loved. The night should have been like any other, a quiet evening where Emily sat cross-legged with a book in her lap and Rex lay stretched across the floor, his ears flicking at every distant sound. Jack had been at the table, his calloused hands holding documents that could change everything, papers and digital files hinting at a laundering scheme connected to dangerous men. He had known it was risky, but Jack could never turn his back on injustice, not after everything he had already sacrificed. That truth, hidden away in a simple USB drive, was a weight that could cost them all. Outside, unseen by the Carter family, shadows lurked, and men with bitter smiles carried cans of gasoline toward the wooden siding of the house. It began with a faint crackle, a sound too small to notice in a world already filled with creaks and sighs of an old home. Then came the acrid smell, seeping under the doorframe, curling into Jack's senses until his soldier instincts screamed. When he looked up, his heart plummeted. The edges of the curtains glowed faintly, smoke trailing upward in thin spirals. In seconds, the world around them erupted into chaos. Flames licked at the walls, windows shattered under the heat, and the air thickened with suffocating smoke. Jack reacted instantly, scooping Emily into his arms as she cried out in confusion, her small arms clutching tightly around his neck. Rex rose to his feet despite his limp, barking fiercely, his voice echoing through the house like a desperate warning. "Dad, what's happening?" Emily whimpered, burying her face against Jack's chest. Jack's jaw tightened, his voice rough but steady. "Hold on, sweetheart. We're getting out." Every step toward the front door was a battle, the heat pressing down like a living beast, wooden beams groaning overhead. Rex pushed himself to keep close, his breathing heavy, but his focus locked on Jack and Emily. For the veteran, the instinct to protect was unshakable. For Rex, the bond with his family was deeper than instinct. It was devotion, born on battlefields and sealed in fire. As they reached the living room, a deafening crash split the air. A section of the ceiling caved in, flames roaring with a hunger that threatened to consume them all. Jack shielded Emily with his body, but a massive burning beam gave way directly in their path. For a split second, time slowed. Jack's mind raced, knowing he couldn't move fast enough while carrying Emily, his arms already aching from the strain. The fire lit Rex's bandaged face, and in that moment, the dog launched himself forward with all the strength left in his wounded frame. He barreled into the falling beam, his body taking the impact, his muscles straining to hold back the crushing weight. The sound of splintering wood and Rex's pained whine pierced the air as Jack stumbled forward, clutching Emily, barely escaping the fiery trap. Outside, the night was alive with shouts, but none came to help. Across the street, silhouettes of neighbors gathered in the shadows, their faces pale in the glow of fire. An elderly man in a gray bathrobe muttered something under his breath, while a young woman clutched her phone, her trembling hands pressing numbers to call the fire department. Yet no one dared to step forward. They watched from the safety of distance, fear of retaliation keeping their feet rooted, their eyes wide with helpless pity. To them, the Carter family's struggle looked like a tragic painting, framed in flames and smoke, each second stretching toward doom. Emily sobbed into her father's shoulder as they stumbled into the yard, coughing, eyes watering from the thick smoke. Jack looked down and saw Rex stagger out behind them, only to collapse heavily onto the ground, his chest heaving, his strength nearly gone. Jack fell to his knees beside him, torn between relief and terror. The fire still roared behind them, consuming room after room, but the house had not yet fully collapsed. The heat seared their skin, the night filled with the crackling of wood, but there was still a haunting pause before everything would be lost. Neighbors whispered, some holding phones, others clutching their children, but none crossed the yard to offer aid. Their silence was deafening, their fear stronger than compassion. Jack's gaze burned as he held Emily close, his other hand resting on Rex's fur, feeling the labored rise and fall of his companion's chest. The blaze raged behind them, threatening to erase everything, but for this fleeting moment they were alive. Scarred, shaken, yet clinging to hope in a world that had already turned its back. The sirens were distant, faint echoes somewhere in the city, still minutes away. The night did not yet offer rescue. It only offered survival. The yard was filled with smoke and the furious glow of flames, the Carter home still burning behind them as neighbors stood frozen in the shadows. Jack held Emily close, her small body trembling in his arms, while at his side Rex lay collapsed on the scorched ground, his chest rising and falling in shallow, uneven gasps. The German shepherd had dragged himself through the doorway despite his limp and bandaged head, but once outside his strength gave way completely. His amber eye, barely visible beneath the wrapping, fluttered shut, and his body slackened as if life itself was slipping away. Jack's heart clenched at the sight, torn between tending to his daughter, helping his dog, and the fire still consuming everything they had ever owned. With a soldier's decisiveness, Jack made a choice. He set Emily down gently beside Rex, brushing a hand across her soot-streaked face, his voice steady but urgent. "Stay here, sweetheart. I'll be right back." The weight of his words left no room for questions. He turned quickly, his silhouette swallowed by the doorway of the burning house once more. Inside, through smoke and blistering heat, waited the single object that could condemn the men responsible for this nightmare, the small USB drive that held proof of their crimes. Without it, all they had suffered would be in vain. Jack's boots pounded against the crackling floorboards as he pushed into the flames again, lungs tightening with each breath of toxic air. The heat slapped against him as he forced his way back in, shielding his face with one arm. Splinters rained down from the ceiling, and every breath burned like swallowing coals. He had spent years fighting in deserts and war-torn cities, but the fire was a different kind of enemy, unpredictable and suffocating, eager to strip away oxygen and hope. Through the haze, Jack pushed toward the desk in the corner where he had last placed the small drive. His eyes stung, sweat rolled down his temples, and the weight of the flames pressed on his chest, but he would not leave without it. His hand closed around the USB, the plastic already hot against his skin, and in that instant he turned and sprinted back, lungs screaming, heart pounding louder than the crack of wood collapsing behind him. When he emerged again into the yard, the night air struck like ice against his blistered skin, but the relief was fleeting. Jack froze mid-step, his eyes wide with shock at the scene before him. Emily knelt beside Rex's unmoving body, her golden hair tangled and damp with tears, her small frame trembling against the glow of fire. She pressed her tiny hands together, clasped like she had seen in movies, or perhaps in the stories Jack had once told, and pushed down on Rex's chest with all the strength her fragile arms could give. Her lips moved between sobs, the words tumbling out in broken whispers. "Breathe. Please breathe again. Don't leave me." Each repetition tore through Jack's heart, every syllable sharpened by the innocence of a child who believed love alone could bring life back. Around them, the neighbors had gathered in uneasy silence, forming a loose circle at the edge of the yard. Their faces were pale in the firelight, eyes reflecting both pity and fear, none daring to step forward. A middle-aged woman in a nightgown held her phone limply by her side, uncertain whether to film or to help, while an older man clenched his fists uselessly in his pockets. The only sound was Emily's desperate crying, her voice high and trembling, and the thud of her tiny palms pressing down again and again on Rex's broad chest. The sight was unbearable, and yet the crowd did not move. Fear chained their feet. The reputation of the criminals who had set the fire weighed heavier than compassion. Jack's throat tightened, his soldier's heart breaking under the weight of his daughter's determination. He rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her, the USB clutched tightly in his fist. His voice cracked, trembling between urgency and grief. "Emily!" "Stop. Stop, sweetheart. Rex isn't gone. He's just unconscious. He's not dead." His words spilled out, desperate to pierce through the haze of her terror. But Emily shook her head violently, tears splashing onto Rex's fur, her cries only growing louder, her small body shaking with the weight of responsibility far too great for a child. She pushed harder, her fingers slipping against the thick fur, sobbing, "He has to wake up. He has to." The world seemed to hold its breath. Then, as if in answer to her pleas, a faint sound broke the stillness. Rex let out a low, guttural whine, barely audible, but enough to send a ripple of life through his body. His front paw twitched, scraping weakly against the ground, and his chest gave a shallow rise beneath Emily's pressed hands. The girl gasped, her sobs pausing, eyes widening in shock and hope all at once. Jack leaned forward, tears stinging his own eyes as relief washed over him, his hand moving gently to rest on Rex's side. The crowd, once stiff with dread, suddenly exhaled in unison, a chorus of gasps and murmured prayers carried into the smoky night. Some wiped their eyes, others clasped their mouths, overcome by the sight of a child's love defying despair. For a moment, the fire behind them was forgotten. Emily collapsed onto Rex, burying her face in his fur, her sobs now of relief, though still trembling with fear. Jack pulled her into his arms, wrapping them both in a desperate embrace, his own tears dampening her tangled hair. He pressed his forehead against hers, whispering words of comfort, though his voice quavered. "He's still here, Emily. You saved him. You really did." His chest heaved, torn between gratitude and the knowledge that Rex was still dangerously weak, but the flicker of life was enough to ignite a fragile hope in them all. At the edge of the crowd, a young man in his early 20s lifted his phone, its red light blinking as it recorded. He wore a hooded sweatshirt, his dark hair damp from the night air, his lips pressed tight in a grim line. Through his lens, the image was haunting. A 5-year-old girl pressing her tiny hands onto a wounded war dog's chest, her face streaked with tears, her cries echoing against the crackle of fire. The frame caught the moment Rex's paw twitched, the relief flooding Jack's expression and the stunned silence of the crowd. The young man's hands shook as he held the phone steady, realizing the weight of what he was capturing. Later, this clip would burn across social media like wildfire, hailed as proof of love, courage, and innocence in the face of tragedy. But the internet was never merciful. Alongside the praise, voices of doubt and condemnation would rise, whispers that Jack Carter was reckless, unfit as a father, endangering his child by keeping a wounded K-9 in their home, dragging her into the path of criminals. Others would sneer that he was unstable, a veteran clinging to broken pieces of war, dragging an innocent girl into the fire of his battles. Yet none of those words mattered in this moment. What mattered was that Emily's tears had called Rex back from the brink, that Jack's family still breathed against a world that wanted to snuff them out. The fire continued to rage, the house collapsing piece by piece, but on the scorched grass of the yard, a fragile miracle had already taken root. Jack held his daughter close, his other hand pressed against Rex's side, feeling the faint rhythm of life that still pulsed within the dog's body. The crowd remained hushed, caught in the gravity of what they had witnessed, their eyes glistening in the light of flames. For Jack, the war was not yet over, but tonight he had seen the power of small hands, the faith of a child, and the loyalty of a wounded friend who refused to let go. The night gave way to dawn with the acrid smell of smoke still hanging in the air, sirens echoing through the street as fire crews battled the last embers of the Carter home. Jack stood dazed on the curb, one arm wrapped protectively around Emily, while paramedics crouched beside Rex's motionless body, checking for signs of life. The German shepherd's chest rose weakly, but he was breathing, his amber eye flickering beneath its bandaged lid, his paw twitching as though refusing to surrender. Neighbors murmured behind police tape, their faces a mixture of awe and unease, but Jack had no space in his heart for their stares. He climbed into the back of the ambulance with Emily clutching his hand and Rex lying on a stretcher, determined not to let go of the only family he had left. The hospital lights were harsh, white corridors humming with the endless buzz of machines, the smell of antiseptic masking the lingering smoke on their clothes. Doctors rushed Rex into emergency care, while nurses tended to Jack's smoke-inhaled lungs and Emily's soot-streaked face. The veteran sat on the edge of a bed, his broad frame slouched in exhaustion, his olive-green jacket scorched and torn, the veteran cap still perched crookedly on his head, as if he needed the word written there to remind himself who he was. Emily leaned against his side, eyes wide but calm, whispering questions only a child would ask. "Daddy, when will Rex wake up? He's strong, right? He won't leave us, right?" Jack pressed his lips together, fighting the burn in his chest, and answered softly, "He's stronger than anyone I know." By morning, the world outside the hospital had already seized upon the story. Headlines lit up screens across the city. 5-year-old tries to save war dog in house fire. Heroic canine protects family from blaze. The viral video had spread through every corner of the internet overnight. News anchors replayed the haunting image of Emily pressing her tiny hands on Rex's chest, her cries shattering hearts across the nation. Strangers wept behind their phones, praising the courage of the little girl and calling Rex a 4-legged hero. Jack watched from the waiting room, the glow of the television cutting across his weary face, and felt a hollow weight settle in his stomach. He had come home from war only to be abandoned, branded broken, dismissed by the very people who now applauded his family because tragedy had turned them into a spectacle. Emily, too young to grasp the bitterness of such irony, only smiled when she saw her face on the screen. "Look, Daddy, they know Rex is a good dog. Everyone will love him now." Her golden hair framed her soot-smudged cheeks, her innocence glowing brighter than the sterile hospital lights. Jack tried to return her smile, but his chest tightened. The praise felt cruel, a reminder that people cared only when the story was sensational enough to trend, not when a veteran struggled to find work or a child needed a safe home. He rubbed his temple, muttering under his breath, "They didn't care when we needed them." Emily tilted her head, not understanding, and wrapped her small hand around his calloused fingers. In the days that followed, reporters crowded the hospital entrance, waving microphones, eager for quotes. Jack kept his head low, shielding Emily from the flashing cameras, while Rex, still recovering, rested in the veterinary ward of the same building, his limp more pronounced, his body weakened by both old wounds and the fire. Nurses adored the dog, slipping him bits of food, whispering about his loyalty, but Jack noticed how quickly admiration could twist into suspicion. Comment sections were already filling with doubt, reckless to keep a war dog around a child. This veteran endangered his daughter by dragging her into his battles. The very voices that called Rex a hero also labeled Jack a danger. One quiet afternoon, as Jack sat by Rex's bed stroking the dog's coarse fur, a soft knock sounded at the door. When he looked up, an elderly woman stepped inside. She was small, her back slightly bent with age, her brown skin creased from years of labor, gray hair tucked beneath a faded shawl. Her dark eyes, sharp but kind, lingered on Jack before shifting to Emily, who sat drawing clumsy hearts on a scrap of paper. "Senor Carter," she greeted in a gentle accent, her voice warm yet tinged with sorrow. "It is Rosa. We live next door, or what was next door." Jack remembered her Rosa, the Mexican widow who had lived quietly in the small brick house across the street for nearly 2 decades. She had been the one who occasionally left tamales on their porch, who waved politely from her garden but never lingered. Now she stepped forward, her shawl wrapped tightly against the hospital chill, her gaze softening as it fell on Emily. "I saw everything," Rosa continued, her hands clasped in front of her chest. "I saw what you and your daughter went through. And I saw the way people looked at you when you came back from war." They forget too quickly. Jack's throat tightened. He wanted to dismiss her kindness, to push away the sympathy he felt unworthy of, but Emily bounded up with the eager smile of a child. "Mrs. Rosa, you came. Rex will be so happy to see you when he wakes up." Rosa knelt with surprising grace for her age, her weathered hands cupping Emily's cheeks, her smile trembling. "Little one, your heart is bigger than this whole city," she whispered. "Do not ever let anyone tell you otherwise." Emily giggled, wrapping her arms around the old woman's neck, and for a moment Jack saw in Rosa's embrace a warmth the world outside had forgotten. Later that evening, Rosa sat with Jack in the quiet of the waiting room, her hands folded over a rosary that glimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. She spoke of her own life, of how she had crossed the border decades ago with her husband, only to bury him too soon and face years of being treated as invisible. "People like us," she said softly, "we live in the margins. But it is in the margins that the truth lives. Do not let them twist your story, Jack. You are not reckless. You are a father who fought for his child. And that dog of yours, he is no danger. He is family." Jack listened, his jaw clenched, his heart torn open by the sincerity in her words. Emily, curled up beside Rex's bed, whispered promises into his ear as if the dog could hear her. "When you wake up, we'll go to the park again. I'll bring you cookies, even if Daddy says no." The child's certainty that love alone could mend wounds was almost painful to watch, yet Jack could not bring himself to shatter it. He envied her innocence, wished he could believe so fully in a world that had done little but prove its cruelty. He leaned back in the chair, eyes closed, listening to the rhythmic hum of machines and his daughter's soft voice, and wondered if perhaps Rosa was right, that in the small, fragile bonds of love lay the only truth worth holding on to. The following morning, cameras still crowded the hospital steps, and Jack braced himself for the relentless scrutiny that would follow. But inside, among the antiseptic walls and muted voices, there was a fragile sanctuary. A father, his daughter, their wounded dog, and an old woman who refused to let them stand alone. The outside world could call him reckless, could label Rex a danger, could praise Emily only as a symbol for their entertainment. Here, however, Jack saw the reality. A family scarred yet unbroken, bound together by faith, loyalty, and the kindness of those society had pushed to the side. The days after the hospital blurred into each other, filled with questions Jack refused to answer and sympathy he did not trust. The fire had taken his home and nearly claimed his family, yet the men who ordered it still walked free, hidden in shadows that thrived on fear. Jack's body was weary, his lungs scarred from smoke, but the soldier inside him could not stay still. He had faced war before, and though this battle was different, the enemy was no less ruthless. He would not remain silent while criminals laughed in the dark, certain that their power kept them untouchable. Rex, though weakened, never left Jack's side. The dog limped badly now, his front leg bound tightly in white bandages, his head still wrapped where the wound throbbed beneath the gauze. His once powerful gait was slower, yet his amber eyes burned with the same fire as on the battlefield. Whenever Jack moved toward the door, Rex rose stubbornly, refusing to be left behind, pressing close as if to remind him that they were brothers in arms. Emily, sensing her father's restless urgency, tugged at his sleeve one morning and whispered, "Daddy, don't go far without us." But Jack knelt and kissed her hair, his heart breaking with the promise he could not make. It was Rosa who first gave him a direction. The old woman visited with her shawl pulled tight against the autumn chill, her face lined with both wisdom and grief. Sitting at the small table of the temporary shelter the family had been given, she lowered her voice and spoke of what she had seen. "They meet sometimes near the old warehouse on Jefferson Street," she said, her accent soft but firm. "Men with black cars, heavy coats, the kind who never look anyone in the eye. I've lived long enough to know what danger smells like." Her eyes held Jack's, unwavering. "If you must fight, fight smart. Do not drag your child into this." Jack listened, his jaw tightening, his fists clenched on the table. He knew Rosa was right, yet the fire in his chest demanded action. "I won't put Emily in danger," he promised, his voice low, gravelly with conviction. but I can't let them think we're prey. If I stay quiet, they'll keep hunting us. I need to bring something solid, something the police can't ignore." Rosa nodded slowly, her rosary beads clicking softly between her fingers, and for the first time, Jack saw in her not just a neighbor, but an ally. Another soul cast aside by society who still carried the courage to stand against injustice. That night, under the dim glow of streetlights, Jack moved through alleys with Rex at his side, the city around them alive with whispers of crime most people chose not to hear. The warehouse Rosa had mentioned loomed ahead, its windows shattered, its walls stained with graffiti, a skeleton of industry long abandoned. Yet even from a distance, Jack saw signs of life. Headlights cutting briefly across cracked pavement, figures slipping through side doors, the faint echo of voices carried on the cold air. He crouched in the shadows, Rex pressed against his leg, ears twitching, nose quivering with alert focus. The old soldier's heart steadied, falling into rhythms he had not felt since patrols in hostile lands, calm, sharp, relentless. Through a gap in the crumbling wall, Jack spotted them. 3 men gathered beneath a broken hanging lamp, their faces hard, coats heavy, hands restless as they exchanged bundles of cash for sealed envelopes. One, tall and gaunt with sharp cheekbones and slicked back hair, barked orders in a low voice, his eyes darting nervously toward the darkness. Another, heavier, wore a thick leather jacket, his broad frame shifting with impatience. The third stood slightly apart, younger, his jaw tight, scanning the shadows as if he already feared being watched. Jack's pulse quickened as he realized Rosa's words were true. The men behind the fire still moved brazenly in his neighborhood. Rex let out a low growl, almost inaudible, his hackles rising. Jack rested a hand on the dog's bandaged head, whispering softly, "Easy, boy." "We're only here to watch." The urge to step forward, to confront them, boiled in his blood, but he forced himself into discipline. He slipped his phone from his pocket, angling the camera through the gap, recording each movement, each exchange of money. The footage was grainy, but the faces were clear enough, the license plate numbers etched into memory as cars pulled away one by one. Jack felt the old adrenaline rush. The thrill of gathering intelligence, of turning shadows into evidence that could pierce through the walls of corruption. Hours later, back at the shelter, Jack replayed the footage with Rosa by his side. The old woman leaned forward, her lined face illuminated by the glow of the screen, nodding with grim recognition. "Yes, those are the same ones I saw." Always near that place, always at night, she reached across the table, placing her fragile hand over Jack's. "This is dangerous, but you are not alone. You have me, and you have that dog who refuses to stop fighting." Jack's throat tightened as he glanced at Rex curled on the floor, the dog's bandaged chest rising and falling steadily, his amber eye watching him with unwavering loyalty. Emily stirred in her sleep nearby, clutching a worn stuffed animal, her cheeks still innocent despite the trauma she had endured. Jack watched her for a long moment, his heart torn between love and duty. He swore silently that she would never follow him into these shadows. Whatever he faced, he would bear it alone, with only Rex and Rosa beside him. Emily deserved the light, not the darkness he was about to chase. The following nights became a cycle of vigilance. Jack returned to the warehouse, sometimes alone, sometimes with Rosa waiting at a distance to keep watch, always with Rex at his side. They collected scraps of information, license plates, overheard conversations, glimpses of documents exchanged. Each piece added weight to the file Jack built, each moment feeding both his determination and his unease. He knew these men were dangerous, knew they would not hesitate to silence him if they discovered his pursuit. Yet he pressed on. The fire that destroyed his home still burning in his memory, the cries of his daughter etched into his heart as a reminder of what was at stake. On one particularly cold night, as frost settled over the streets and the city seemed to sleep, Jack and Rex crouched behind a rusted dumpster, watching once more. Rex's breathing was rougher now, his body still not healed, but his presence remained steady, unwavering, as if no amount of pain could weaken his resolve. Jack placed a hand on his companion's neck, feeling the steady pulse beneath the bandages, and whispered, "We're in this together, old friend." In the distance, headlights flared, voices rose, another deal unfolding under the cover of night. Jack steadied his phone, recording, his jaw clenched with quiet fury. In those moments, They were no longer just a broken veteran, a wounded dog, and an old immigrant woman. They were a fragile alliance forged by loss and resilience. 3 lives society had cast aside, now bound together against a darkness that thrived in silence. They were the unseen, the forgotten, the ones who had nothing left to lose. And in that very truth lay their strength. The night spent crouched in alleys and recording secret meetings eventually grew into weeks, and Jack's worn notebook filled with license plates, times, places, and faces that could no longer be denied. The file he built was heavy with truth, heavy enough to crush the silence that criminals thrived on. He carried it in a plain folder, the pages smudged with his own fingerprints, the phone videos stored in a device he guarded like a weapon. With Rex limping by his side and Rosa watching the street from her porch, Jack walked into the police precinct one cold morning. His steps echoed in the tiled corridor, steady but burdened by the knowledge of what he was about to set in motion. The officers at the desk glanced up, their expressions tightening when they recognized him. To them, Jack Carter was a figure both infamous and fragile, the veteran whose family had been torn apart in a fire, the man whose daughter's cries had lit up television screens across the nation. They offered polite words, but hesitation lingered in their eyes. The unspoken reminder that the men Jack sought to expose were dangerous, their reach long, their influence corrupting. Jack laid the folder on the counter and said simply, his voice deep and unwavering, "This is everything you need. It's not a story. It's evidence." At first, the precinct buzzed with unease. Some officers murmured that it was too risky, that the case would collapse in court, that the criminals' lawyers would shred it apart. Jack's jaw tightened as he listened from a corner, his fists clenched while Rex sat beside him, head lowered, the bandaged legs stretched stiffly. Days passed as investigators reviewed the material, their skepticism eroded piece by the weight of the evidence. Each video clip, each license plate, each transaction noted with soldier's precision was undeniable. The men who had torched his home were revealed as more than shadows. They were names, faces, and times stamped into reality. When the arrests finally came, they were swift and loud. Sirens pierced the city, flashing lights lit up the warehouse on Jefferson Street, and armored officers stormed through the doors. Jack stood on a nearby rooftop with Rosa at his side, watching the raid unfold below. The tall, gaunt man was dragged out in handcuffs, shouting empty threats, the heavy one in the leather jacket shoved against police with curses that broke into silence when rifles pointed his way. The youngest tried to flee, his sneakers slapping against concrete until he was tackled beneath the glare of floodlights. Jack's heart pounded not with triumph, but with weary relief, his hand resting on Rex's fur as the dog growled low, as though sensing the justice finally delivered. But when the newspapers printed the story, Jack's name was barely mentioned. Headlines celebrated the takedown of a dangerous crime ring. Photographs showed lines of suspects in chains, and one article tucked at the bottom gave Rex a brief title. Heroic K9 survives blaze and helps owner gather evidence. Emily's face appeared again in clips replayed on social media, her small hands pressing Rex's chest, her cries rebroadcast as a symbol of innocence. Jack Carter remained in the shadows, the man who had pieced it all together, whose silence had carved the path to justice. Yet he did not complain, did not demand credit. To him, recognition meant nothing compared to the fact that his daughter could sleep in peace. A week later, an unexpected kindness found them. A local charity, moved by the viral story and the quiet determination of the veteran who had lost everything, offered the Carter family a new beginning. A modest home at the edge of the city awaited them. 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen with sunlight spilling through a window, and a yard large enough for a child's laughter and a dog's rest. When Jack first stepped across the threshold with Emily's hand in his and Rex limping faithfully behind, the weight on his chest eased, if only a little. Rosa stood at the doorway, her shawl pulled around her shoulders, her eyes glistening with pride. The house was not large, but to Emily it was a castle. She ran from room to room, her giggles echoing off freshly painted walls, her little voice crying, "This one is mine, and Rex can sleep here." The German shepherd padded after her, his limp slowing him, but his tail thumped faintly against the floor with each step. Jack followed quietly, his hands resting on the straps of his worn jacket, his eyes drinking in the sight of safety reborn. For the first time in months, Emily's laughter was not tempered by fear. Rosa sat on a chair by the window, her rosary dangling in her lap, smiling through tears. In the weeks that followed, neighbors who had once whispered from shadows came by with cautious gifts. A basket of bread, a blanket, a box of toys for Emily, all tokens of guilt or redemption, Jack could not tell. He accepted them with silent nods, never forgetting the way those same neighbors had watched the fire without moving. Emily, however, accepted them with open arms, her innocence unbroken. To her, kindness was kindness, no matter how late it arrived. Rosa, watching from the porch, murmured to Jack one evening, "Sometimes, Niño, the hardest hearts are softened not by anger, but by example." Still, the image that endured was not the raid or the arrests, not even the charity's gift of a home. It was that night in the yard, the flames raging and a child pressing her hands on a dog's chest, whispering prayers that life would return. The video replayed countless times, shared across countries, debated and dissected, yet for Jack it was not a clip but a memory carved into his soul. He would forever see Emily's tear-streaked face, hear her trembling voice, and feel the faint tremor of Rex's paw answering her love. That was the true story, the one that would never fade. One morning, as the sun rose pale and gold over their new home, Jack stood in the doorway. Emily skipped in the yard, her blonde hair catching the light, while Rex lay stretched on the grass, his eyes half closed, his body finally at rest. Rosa leaned against the porch railing, humming softly, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders as she watched the scene with a grandmother's pride. Jack breathed in the air, free of smoke filled only with the scent of dew and earth. For the first time in years, peace did not feel like a lie. He had no medal, no headline, no speech written in his name. What he had was more than enough. The trust in his daughter's eyes, the loyalty of a wounded dog, and the unwavering friendship of an old woman who had chosen to stand beside him. To the world, he was a shadow. To Emily and Rex, he was their only hero. And as the sunlight spread across the threshold of their new beginning, Jack Carter stepped forward, not as a soldier or a victim, but as a silent hero who had given everything for love, justice, and family. The story of Jack, Emily, and Rex reminds us that true heroes are often those who walk in silence, carrying wounds the world does not see, yet still choosing compassion over bitterness. It shows that love and kindness can break through prejudice, and that sacrifice, even when unnoticed, can change lives. As you finish this story, I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments, tell us what this means to you, and join our community by subscribing for more stories of courage and humanity. May God bless you and your loved ones, and may compassion always guide your steps.